Okay. So, okay. So everybody should be able to see my desktop now. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So let me get to my T140. Okay. So tonight we have a pretty busy night. We're going to talk about lists, 2D lists, and dictionaries, and Project 2 draft, because I think Project 2 draft is due this coming week, which is a grocery list. But let me double check that for a second. Does anybody know? I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head right now. Is the grocery due in week 4 or week 5? I think it's due in week 5, isn't it?
It looked like it was actually due this week.
Okay, so we'll go over that too. So it's going to be kind of a busy night tonight to go over all of this. So we may go a little bit past 10, but we'll do what we can, okay?
Okay.
All right, so I'm just going to dive into it. So we're going to start with lists. So right now, what we're talking about this week, all of it, lists, 2D lists, and dictionaries, is all about managing your data in memory, okay? So far we've had single variables. We've assigned those variables to a single value. A string, an integer, a float. Well, that doesn't go very far when you're programming with larger data sets. Okay, you can't have, you can't have 1,000 variables in a single file. I mean, that becomes unmanageable. Python will let you, but think about how difficult that would be to manage. So we need a better way to manage our data. And one of those ways is lists. Okay, lists is a very simple way to manage a collection of information. So that's all any of these are. We're just collecting things together. Think of it as, you've got a file folder for, all of your telephone bills, and you put those telephone bills in that file folder. That's a collection of telephone bills. In Python, we can get collections of things by using one of our data management tools. And the first data management tool we're looking at is a list. A list is just basically a collection. It is a collection with a beginning and an end, and that beginning and an end has something in it, has some number of things in it, be it 0 or be it 100. So what we have here on the right-hand side of the screen is just a couple of examples of lists. So we have a variable called strList, and in that we have 4 elements: Alice, Shanila, Bobix, and Tariq. And I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. But here are some interesting things about the list. You'll notice these square brackets, okay? A square bracket denotes the beginning, an open square bracket denotes the beginning of a list, and a closed square bracket denotes the end of a list. And in between each element in the list, you have a comma. So this is important because some people will start typing and they won't put commas in, and then they'll get syntax errors. And I'll show you a couple of those syntax errors in just a minute, because we'll mess things up and run it and see what it looks like. And you can have just about anything you want in a list. You can have a list of strings like strList. You can have a list of numbers like numList. You'll notice here that in each case, I'm assigning a variable to the list. So this list is always going to be referenced by strList. And then we will use stir list to get the information inside the list. So when you pass around stir list, when you're using that in your function, you're passing around all of this. So you have access to any element in the list. So there are different things you can do. You can create an empty list. You can add to a list or append. You can remove from a list. There's all kinds of things you can do. So let's run the code to the left for a second. And what we see here is, so first of all, let's start with what lines 5 and line 6 are doing for us, because you're going to see these in your challenges, and I don't want you to get confused. If you look at this statement on line 5, what this is saying is, because up to here we know what this statement says. The sys.argv of 1 says Codio is going to give me some piece of information. And that information is going to be assigned to the variable list1. So there's something new here. It's this. Okay? The dot split, open single quote, comma, close single quote, close paren. What this section right here says is what Codio is giving me, I want to split that string by commas and put it in, because that's what this split method does. Okay? So what Codio will have done is said argv is all of this stuff in here, and then the split will have split it for list 1. So because we've print list 1 here, in fact, let's do this. Let's do list 1 is so it's a little easier to read over here. So if I run the code to the left again, oops, what did I do? Oh, I can't, can I? Okay. Okay. My bad. What I'm trying to do here is just show you in a little bit more clear way that what we're having. So what Codio gave us with this was this for list 1. So line 5 essentially is this, assigning it to list 1. Line 6 is this with an assignment to list 2. And then we have this thing down here called list 3 on line 21. Well, list 3 is an example of how you can combine different types into the same list. So we'll see here that list 3 has the number 1, the string red, and the Boolean true, and they all exist just fine within the same list. Does anybody have a general discussion of lists?
That makes sense.
Okay, good. All right. So, setting a list. All you do here is, all we've got here on the left-hand side is we've got a variable named A-list. A-list is set equal to this list with Alice, Shanila, Bob, and Tariq in it. So if I print a list, I'll get all of this out. Sorry about that. Just like we got in the last one. But what if I only want to get Shanila? Or what if I want to reset the first element in the list to Sean? Well, let's do something here really quickly, because I'm going to run the code, and you'll see that it prints out this. But I want to do something first. I want to show you how to get to the elements in the list, okay? So we're going to do something that we had last week, which is a for loop. And we're going to say for element in a list. And this can come in very handy when you're doing your next assignment and you want to do a for loop over a list. And I'm going to print element. So I'm going to run the code, and you'll see that gives me all of my elements. Now, let's say I wanted to access it differently. So now I'm going to say, this is another way to do it. It's another example. I'm going to say for counter 0, counter is less than a list. Oh, sorry. Length of a list. I think this may be Java syntax, and I apologize if it is. Hasn't gotten me yet. Print a list. Hold on. See what happens when I run the code. All right, I have a syntax error. For counter equals 0. Completely Java syntax. My apologies. We're just going to do it like this. For counter list within a list. Yeah, that was all Java syntax. I apologize. I'm getting my head into Python right now. Don't do what I just did. Okay. So now let me run it. Valid syntax for counter less than when a list. What did I do wrong there? I don't even know right now. I'm sorry. It's been a long week. File. Nope. Counter equal counter plus 1. Print that. Did I not do that? Oh, my bad. Sorry. This is what happens when you spend too many days coding in a row, which means no weekends. So what I wanted to show you here was this section of the output, because I think it makes it relatively clear, even though I was speaking mumbo jumbo there for a minute, of what you can do to get an element from a list. So if we look here and we see a list of 0 is Atlas, what has happened is we have gotten to the value Alice by saying, I want to get the value from a list that's at position whatever counter is. And in this case, counter was 0. So I could have just as easily done the following. Let me comment this stuff out. I could have said print Um, to run the code. So here we see A list of 0 is Alice. And then I'm just going to copy these. So what I'm doing here is I'm just giving you guys an idea of how to access the elements in a list. Okay? So everything's fine, 0, 1, 2, and 3. Great. We know that A list of 0 is Alice. We know that A list of 1 is Shanila. Well, all lists always begin at index 0 and go until their length minus 1. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is if we look and we count the number of elements in A list, there are 4 elements. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. But you'll notice here I only went to element 3. I said 0, 1, 2, and 3. Well, that gives me 4 elements, 0, 1, 2, and 3. But what happens if I just make a mistake and go to 4? What do you think it's going to do? You think it's going to give me an element that doesn't exist? Nope. This is what you're going to get. Index out of range. If you get an index out of range error when you're doing any of this program, it means you've walked off the end of the list. Because if I count, I'm telling it there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements in the list when there aren't. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you get an index out of range error, come back and listen to this. And this is why. Okay?
Okay.
Good. So what we're doing here on line 21 is that we are changing the value in the list. Okay? So the value at position 1, which is going to be Shanila, because it's 0, 1, 2, 3, is going to be changed to Sean. So if we look here, we have Alice, Shanila, Bob, and Tariq. Before the change, this is before change. After change, this is the result from line 21, you'll see that the position of 1, the value at the position of 1, has been changed to Sean. Does this pretty much make sense to everybody?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. And I'm kind of going through this a lot right now because you're going to have to do this in your challenge or in your milestone. So how do I just create an empty list, add things to it? So first of all, to create an empty list, you just do variable name equals open close brackets with nothing in between them. That will get you a list with nothing in it. Well, then how do I add something to the list? Well, I add something to the list by using the append. On line number 3, when I use this syntax right here, Python knows that I've given it a list. So it gives me all kinds of stuff that I can do to that list that I get for free. Okay, and one of those things is append. And append just says, add something to the end of the list. That's all that means. So I'm going to append the number 1, then the number 2, then the number 4, in that order to the list. So on line 10, it says print num list. Well, I have 1, 2, and 4. Well, that's great. That's wonderful. But what if I wanted a 3 between 2 and 4? Well, because Python knows it's a list, and it knows it's a list because of that, I have this other method called insert. And I can insert into the list. So I'm going to say at position 2, insert the number 3. So position 0, 1, 2, because I've inserted the number 3, and then 3. So that's what you get. Now, a nice thing you can do if you're curious I can go look at Python list methods and data structures, Python. Python has some really great documentations. docs.python.org. Always go to the 3 documents. And these are all of the things you can do to a list. You can extend it, you can append it, you can remove an item, you can pop an item, you can clear the whole list. All of these things, you can copy a list. All of these things that you get for free because you defined numList with this. So if you're curious about how to do any of these, you can look them up, but these are all the things you get for free. Even though we're not covering them in Codio, they're still valid and could potentially be useful. Right? You can remove things, you can insert, you can append, you can extend. So that's just a quick note to let you know that when you go out and search for some things on your own, there's some good documentation out there that Python has. Okay, you saw me use len earlier. Len says, get me the length of a list. Get me the length of a thing. Now, length will tell you how many elements are in it. So if I look at a list on line 7, how many elements do I have in it? Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 elements in that list. And that's great because it's going to tell me that there are 5, which is true. Now, here's something to consider. We're going to do this again. Counter is 0, while counter is less than len a list. So let's not do that. Let's do counter is less than or equal to len a list. I'm going to print a list of counter. Who thinks I'm going to have a problem with this? I'm hoping everyone is, because this is going to walk off the end of the array. Let's run it, and I'll show you why. Whoops, it's not. It's going to do what you shouldn't do, which is, sorry about that. This is the definition of an infinite loop that I just fixed. Okay. So here's the problem that I was intending to have, not the problem that I first had. This tells me, again, that I have list index out of range. Well, why is list index out of range? It's out of range because of this equal sign. Because I said len of a list is going to give me 5. Well, that's great. That is the length of a list. However, I'm starting at counter 0. Your first index in a list always is number 0. So because I started at 0, I'm actually going to go through the list. I'm going to go through this loop 6 times. And on the 6th time, I'm going to get an index out of bounds exception because there's only 5 elements in here. So if I change this to not having an equal sign in it and I run it, I no longer get the index out of bounds exception. So when you're using len and any kind of a data structure, remember it's less than, not less than or equal to, when you're counting through the loop. Now, one way to avoid this is, and I'm going to show you this again, and then I think we're going to actually do it, is for element in a list. This is a great shorthand way that you'll never get. You'll never walk off the end of an array if you do it like this. Because what this says is, it's your general for loop. Element is just a variable name. And the important part here is in a list. So for whatever the element is in a list, I'm going to print the element. Well, each element is here. And it will go through in order. That's what this for statement does. It says go through in order the list, a list, and at each position, assign the value to element, and then let me do something with element. So here you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. And I didn't have to use len, and I didn't have to potentially walk off the end of my list. Is that pretty clear?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good. Good. All right. So now we have range. Range is can you guys hear me?
You just got cut off just a little bit.
I can hear you.
Okay, it does that sometimes, and I don't know why. Okay, so looping with range. So range allows us to do, you can do, range basically says from some starting point to some stopping point, do something. So for a list, we can start at any position that's valid in the list, so any index from 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and we can then loop through that list to do something. So let's look at a couple of examples here. The stop point is going to be len my list. So the length of my list is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So stop is actually going to equal 5 here because it's getting the length of this array. Now I'm going to say a range. So this is just the output of the function range, and it's going to say from 0 to stop. Now, it's important to know here that the range function, which is what this is going to start at whatever you tell it to start at, and it's going to stop before it gets to its stopping place. So this is effectively saying less than the length of my list. So here on line 9, I have for I in a range. Print my list of I. So what range gives you is a number. So the range for this, let's just run the code for a second. So the list has 5 elements, and then you see 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. So if I'm going to change this a little bit, and I'm going to say my list equals %. And I'm going to say I, comma, that. So now I think this shows it a little bit clearer. What we have here is we're saying my list of %D. So I is just a number, starting with 0 in this case and ending with 4. So it would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're using it to get the value at that index for the list. So now that's great. So let's say I didn't do from 0 to stop. Let's say I did from 0 to 3. And let's see what would happen when I run the code. Well, all of a sudden over here, I only get 3 elements, 0, 1, and 2, because my stop place has been changed to 3. So my range is 0, 1, and 2. So you'll see that over here. My range is 0, 1, and 2. I could have also said, just like that. And my range will go back to 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So there'll be 5 elements in the list. And so they put it all together down here on line 17. For I, which is just a variable. It's just a variable name. It's a container for a number. That number will start at 0, so that's my entry point into the list. My exit point is 1 less than the length of my list. So it's not inclusive. Range is not inclusive of the end point. And then you're just going to print it out. And down here, we have one more thing, and it's a step. So when we look at this output for range, we notice we're going 1 at a time. 0 plus 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. So we're going stepwise by 1. We're always incrementing the loop by 1. What if I don't want to increment it by 1? What if I want to increment the loop by something else? Well, you do that by adding this third parameter to the range. The range says increment my count by 2. So in this case, I would have gone, let's do this. Just going to copy this guy so we can maybe get a little bit clearer picture of what's going on. So here, 1, 5, and 9, because we realize we start at 0, and because we're doing a step of 2, our next index is going to be 2, because this is going to be 0 plus 2, and then 2 plus 4, because we did a step of 2. Now I could make the step of 3. Let's see what happens when I make the step 3. If I run the code, I only get 2 elements, 1 and 7, because I started at 0. That was my entry point into the loop. I added 3 to 0, so my next position would be the fourth position in the loop, which would be 7. And then if I add 3 again, I exit the loop because I'm out of range. So that is how you use the range method. And it comes in very handy. All right, so this is even easier, and I'll just say this again because this is what I was telling you before. Element. For the variable element in my list, print element. This is the quickest, the easiest way to go through any list, because this syntax of in will ensure that you go through each the list stepwise. So it's step 1, so it's only adding 1 each time, and you're getting each and every element. So if you want to evaluate each and every element in a list, 4 element in my list is the way to do it. It's the 4 is the first keyword, and the in is the second keyword. Element is just a variable name, and my list is the list that you created. Okay, so we're going to do a couple challenges, and then we're going to go to 2D lists and then dictionaries. And like I said, we might go past 10 tonight. Okay, so this is just a simple sum. Okay? So first things first, let's just go with what Codio is giving us. Codio is giving us an argument that we know is going to be a list because it's telling us it's going to split it with commas. So it's a comma-separated list of something. Well, what is that comma-separated list? This says we're passing in a list of numbers, add up all the list elements, and output the result. So first of all, let's just do this. Let's print numbers. Let's just see what they gave us. Okay, so let's not worry about the expected output. Let's just say, okay, so this is what they gave us. Now this tells us two things. One is it in fact is a list, but two, the elements in the list are strings. Those quotes around it mean that's a string. So I can't add strings together and get a number out. So I know automatically that I'm going to have to use the int function as I have used in previous challenges. So I'm going to just comment this out for a minute. And now, since I know I want to go through every element in the list and add it up, and I'm going to have to print out my total, I know I'm probably going to need a helper variable. So I'm going to call that helper variable my total. And I'm going to just assign it 0 because I don't want it to have any value yet. So I'm going to use the 4 element in numbers. And I'm going to say my total equals my total plus, this is where that int function comes in, element. Who thinks that's going to be right? So this is very simple. With about 4 lines of code, we were able to do a sum. That's what this was. So we went through every element in the array that Codio gave us, and we were able to, no matter what it sends in, it could send in 100 numbers, and this code would still be right. So does this make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So now I'm going to populate a new list. Okay? So what's going to happen here? You're provided with a number n, going to create a list, and then using a loop, populate the list with n elements. Set each list element to the index multiplied by 10. You might pass in a value, in which case you should return an empty list. Okay, that's fine. So n is just a number. That's all it is. So what we want to do is we want to create a list. So let's start with, we're going to call it my list, and we're going to create an empty list. Whoops, wrong thing. Create an empty list. So I've created my empty list, and I want to put something in my list. Well, what we're told here is that we're going to use a loop, and we're going to populate the list with n elements and set each list element to the index multiplied by 10. If you pass in a 0, you should return an empty list. Well, that's good. So first, I'm just going to do an if statement. If n is greater than 0, So if it's 0, I'm never going to actually do anything to the list, and I'll be right. So now, this is where the range comes in. You can do a for I in range 0 to 10. And then the append method is what we use to add something to the list. MyList.append I times 10. Okay. And so what they didn't tell us here is that we have to print out the value of MyList. Print MyList. Okay. So again, just a few lines of code, and we can handle anything that they send in. They could send 100 in. So what we did is, first of all, they said, beware here. All right? We might pass in a 0, in which case you should return an empty list. So that told me that I needed an if statement. Okay? So, it says, if it's 0, then don't do anything. That's really what this beware said. So, I'm only going to do something if the value that Codio gives me is greater than 0. And what's that I'm going to do? I'm going to use a for loop. I'm going to use the range method that we learned about. My entry point is 0. My exit point is n, because it's whatever number Codio wants it to go to. And what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to add a value to my list, and I do that by using the append method. And the value in this case is the index I multiplied by 10. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Let's see. Short string list. What time is it? It's 9:45. What I'm going to do is, let's go times 10 every other. 1 in, 2 out. I'm just seeing if there's any one of these. We're passing a list of numbers. You need to create 2 new lists in your chart. Add an odd numbers in one list. Put even numbers in the other list. Output the odd list first and the even list second. Okay. So we're going to do this one real quick, and then we're going to go to 2D lists and then dictionaries. So a couple people asked me if I could show some of the more complex ones for the challenges. So I'm going to try and do that. I'm going to try and do 1 or 2 simple ones, and then move to 1 or 2 of the complex ones, and then you guys can fill in between. So what's going on here is basically what we're doing is we're splitting some lists, okay? So here, what I'm getting is I'm getting some list of numbers from Codio. And they're giving me, it says for I in range 0 to length of numbers, numbers equal int numbers of I. So basically what they're doing is they're changing, what are they doing? They're changing the value of numbers to an int. That's all this is doing. So if I just do this, check it's going to be wrong. We know that. And all that I'm going to get is this list of integers, which is fine. I'm just going to comment that out right now. So what do they want us to do? They want us to put even numbers in one list, odd numbers in the other list, print out the odd list first, and then the even list. So what I'm going to need is I'm going to need 2 more lists. So I'm going to call it odd list, and I'm going to create an empty list. And then I'm going to have even list, and I'm going to create an empty list. So now what do I want to do? Well, I want to go through the loop, and for every odd number, I want to add it to the odd list. And for every even number, I want to add it to the even list. So I'm going to say for element in numbers. Now, they were nice enough to give us this even function. So it will return true if the number is even or false if the number is odd. So I'm going to say if is even element, E-L-E-M-E-N-T, is false, then I'm going to say odd list dot append element. Else, even list dot append element. And then it wants me to print them out, the odds first and then the evens. So I'm going to print odd list and print even list. I keep wanting to put that T there. So let's see if I did everything right. Okay, I didn't. So let's see.
Lisa?
Go ahead. Yeah.
You actually have a T right on the if. On the if.
Say that again.
You have the extra T after even.
You're right. I do. I wanted that T there tonight for some reason, didn't I? Okay. So that. So yes, we're fine. So again, I went through. The great thing about this way of processing is that you don't actually have to know what's in numbers. You honestly don't care what's in numbers. What you care about is whether or not your logic is processing the data correctly. And in this case, they could have given me nothing in numbers. They could have given me a list of 1,000 elements. It didn't matter. All I needed to know was these are going to be integers and what I have to do with those integers. And what I had to do was split them out. If they're not even, put them in the odd list. Otherwise, put them in the even list. And we were given what an is even is. So didn't take a lot of lines of code, but it can potentially do a lot of processing. Okay? You guys ready to try the in-between for lists?
Sure.
Okay, good. I was hoping you'd say that. So that's all done for this one. And now we're going to go to the dashboard. And we're going to do 2D lists. 2D lists are very much like lists, except they're multidimensional. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about from the perspective of an Excel spreadsheet or a table, if you have a grid or a graph and you have rows and columns, you actually have a multidimensional array. You have some number of rows and some number of columns. They always happen to be even number, the same number of rows are going to be, the same number of columns are going to be on every row. So if I think about this as a grid, it gets a little simpler because I have, in this case, if I'm just looking here at a two-dimensional array, I have down here, I have 2 dimensions, okay? I have rows. This is a row. This is a row. This is a row. And I have columns, okay? Alice, Tariq, and Bob are columns. 23, 18, and 31 are columns. Blue, red, and green are columns. And Audi, Mini, and Renault are columns. So I have a grid here. They're calling it a multidimensional array. They're calling it a 2D list. So it's really just a grid. And I'm going to learn how to access this grid. I'm going to learn how to put numbers into the grid. I'm going to learn how to take numbers out of the grid. I'm going to learn how to create new grids. Okay? So that's all this is. It's the next step after lists, but 2D lists are just a grid. Okay? So if I run the code here, I've just gone through my people 2D list. So let's notice a couple of things about this 2D list. First of all, it opens and closes with the brackets, just like any other list. But there's something additional here. Each of my rows opens with a square bracket and closes with a square bracket. And between each of my rows, there's a comma. So for this first list, Alice, who's 23, likes blue and has an Audi, I have a list. This row is, in fact, a list. Its data is Alice, 23, blue, and Audi. Okay? I have another list after that. Its data is Tariq, 18, red, and Mini. Well, how do I do this? How do I go through two different lists? Well, you have two different loops, one inside the other. They're called nested loops. So the outer loop is always row, and the inner loop is always column. So it's row-wise. So it's always row first, and then the individual cells, which would be the columns. That's how you always do it, pretty much in any language. So we're just saying here, for row in people, so this is a row. So that's the first thing we're going to get to. The first row we're going to get to is the one that contains Alice, 23, blue, and Audi. And I'm going to print person, and then the information in there are the columns. So for column in row, this is row, which equates to that on the first go-round. I'm going to print column. So again, if I run the code, that's what I have here. Okay, I have 1, 2, 3 rows, and each row has data in it. And each of these is a column. So if you're familiar with an Excel spreadsheet, if you're familiar with any kind of tabular tables or matrices, that's what this is. Okay, so they're just going to go through what I've already explained. That's all. I don't know why it's doing this. Go back. Nope, don't know why it did that. So we'll just go on to the next one, and I'll try and figure out what that is. So creating a 2D list. So here you just have creating a 2D list. That's all you've done. All you've done is done an open square bracket and a closed square bracket, and inside you've added lists that are comma separated. Again, it's row-wise. So if we're looping through both dimensions, we always go row, then column. So this is very similar to what we just did. So now, that's how you statically define a list, but we're not going to do a lot of that. What we're going to do is create a dynamic 2D list. I'm going to let you guys run through the flowed, even though I just probably made you sick to your stomach. And what we're going to do is go in here and talk about it, okay? Data is a list. We know that it's an empty list. We know this from the previous module. And I want to add 5 rows and 4 columns to my list. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to go for rows and columns. So again, I'm going to start by saying for X in range 0 through rows. So I'm always going to start at 0 because it's a list. That's always the entry point. And I'm going to go for rows. Well, rows, I want 5 rows. And then I'm going to append, and this is interesting here, this is different. I'm going to append an empty list. So every time I encounter a new row, I'm going to append an empty list. And then inside that list, because I'm going through my columns, we're going to append cells. So data of X row dot append. So here we have a little bit different syntax. So this is our row counter X. So whether we're on row 0 or row 1 or row 2, and I'm going to then, to that row, append a string of X comma Y, which will append it into the column. So another way to look at this is once it's created, I can say data of 0, 0. I want to print this. Print data of 0, 0 equals percent data of 0, 0. Run the code. Oh, what did I do wrong? Percent deformat. A number is required, not a stir. Oh, my bad. Yes. Run the code. Okay, so here we have data at 0, 0. Now previously what we had was data at 0. But now that we have rows and columns, this is saying give me the data element that is at row 0 and column 0. I could have also said give me the data that is at row 0 and column 1. Now this is highly inefficient to do it this way. You always want to do this through loops. Lists are almost always done with loops. So, but what I wanted to show you here is kind of what this X and row and Y meant, okay? This is always the row. This is always the column. So they filled it in by going through the rows first and then going through the columns. Is this relatively clear?
Yes.
Is that okay with it? Okay, just checking. Okay, so we're going to do a challenge or two here, and then we're going to move on to dictionaries and spend about a half an hour on dictionaries. Well, we're not even going to be able to spend that much because, well, let's see what we can do. Okay, so we pass in a two-dimensional list. You should output the third element of the second row. So, all right, so let's print out. Now, it's list 2D, list 2D. Now, it's the third element of the second row, okay? So, really, what it is it's the second row, and because it starts at 0, it will be 0, 1 is the second row, and then the third element. So because it starts at 0, 0, 1, 2, it's 2. Check it. Let's see if I did it right. And I did. Okay? So that one was pretty easy. So now what we're going to do is they're going to pass in a two-dimensional list. We should add up all the numbers for each row and output that number and then output a grand total. So because I have to add up the numbers for each row and a grand total, I'm going to need at least one helper variable. And I'm going to call it grand total and I'm going to make it 0. So now, and don't worry about all this stuff. This is just importing the numbers and then making them numbers. So don't worry about anything before line 7 at this point. What we're guaranteed is that what's in numbers is a two-dimensional array of integers. So I'm going to say for row in numbers. So that gets me my numbers. And then I'm going to say here, I'm going to say row total is 0. Now I'm going to say for column in row, I'm going to say row total equals row total plus column. And then when I'm all done, I'm going to print row total. And then when I'm really all done, I'm going to print grand total. Oops. So again, we've gone row-wise. So we always start at the rows, then move to the columns. I have a helper variable here that's outside of the loops, grand total, and I have another helper variable here that's inside the loop. And this helper variable just allows me to keep track of the row total. Now, why did I put it inside the loop? Well, put it inside the loop because it makes managing easier. I could have put it outside the loop, and then when, right after we had done print total, I could have reset it to 0. But I chose not to do that. So let's check it. Okay, so I did something wrong. Okay, error, unsupported operand types plus for int. Plus int and stir. Okay, so we're just going to do this. I think that's where it is. Line 16. Check it. All right. So I should try again. Your program output 0, minus 3, 6, and 0. And it should have been 0, 6, 3, and minus 3. 0, minus 6, 3. Oh, my bad. Duh. Total equal grand total, TOTAL, plus row total. That would help. Now we got it. Okay. So do you see what we did here? We went row-wise. So we start at the rows. We go into the columns. This is a pattern that you should follow pretty regularly. We add up the total for the rows inside this nested for loop. Once the for loop is done, which means we've gone through every column in an individual row, we come out here and we print the total for the row, and then we add up the grand total, which I did not do the first time. And then at the very end of the program, we print the grand total. Okay, we'll do a dynamic creation, and then we're going to go off to dictionaries, because you're absolutely going to have to be able to do dictionaries for the milestone. So we're going to create a list and pass in two numbers, A and B. You should create a list with A rows and B columns, and then you should then populate each cell like this. So row 0, column 0, row 1, column 1, row 2, column 2. So we know what we're going to do. We're going to create a multidimensional list. So my list, I'm going to start it this way because I don't know how many of anything I'm going to get. So all I know is that I'm going to have a list. And then I get two numbers. I get A and B. A is rows and B is columns. So we always go row-wise. So we're going to go 4, I in range. This is where range is helpful. 0 to A. And then 4. Actually, I'm going to do R and C in range 0 to B. Okay? So I know I'm going to have a row. So every time I come up to a new row, I'm going to say my list of R dot append an empty list. And now I'm going to add things to that empty list. So I'm going to say my list of row Oh, I didn't do that right. Hold on. My list of row of column is going to be R, whoops, my bad, sorry, R percent D, C percent D, percent R comma C. And then I'm assuming it wants me to print them. Let's see if I did that right. No, what did I do? Index error, list index out of range. My list are. My list, what did I do wrong here? 0. So 0, my list of 0. Dot append. Oh, I have no brain tonight. My apologies, people. Okay, so my list for 0, my list of 0. So let's just do this. Check it. Okay. All right, list index out of range because there's nothing there. My list is an empty list. My list I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank tonight. I have to apologize to you people. Boy, it's having a hard time. All right. So index out of range because there's nothing in it. So, my bad. My list dot append. I apologize. Now let's check it. Okay. List assignment index out of range. And that would be true. My list of R dot append. Okay. Sorry, we've been working crazy at work. My brain is fatigued. All right, now we got it right. I'm sorry for confusing people. All right. First thing you do is you append a new row to my list. And then you go into the columns. And then to that row, you append the data for the column. I'm sorry if I made that confusing for everyone. Did I make it too confusing? At least that's not a resounding yes. Okay, does everybody have a little bit of brain left? Because we're going to go through dictionaries, and then I'm going to try and get to at least some of the grocery list. And unfortunately, tonight's just one of the busiest nights because you have to have all of this to do the grocery list. Okay, what's a dictionary? Well, a dictionary is just another container. In this case, what you have is you have a name-value pair. So we have a name, in this case called name, and the value is Lisa. And we have an age, and the value is 29. So if I just run this code, you'll see name Lisa, age 29. Well, what's important here is that we have keys and values. So I can do a couple things. I can also say print person of name and see what happens. See if my brain's working. It's not. Oh, my bad. Sorry. It's a string. So name is a string. I have to treat it like a string. Okay. So here I said person of name, and it gave me Lisa. And I can say person age, and it will give me 29. So very much like in the previous ones where I had an index of 0 or an index of 1 or an index of 2, here instead of an index that starts at 0 and ends at some number, I can have whatever I want be the key. I can have a name, I can have a number, I can have whatever I want. So dictionaries are more flexible. They're still a way of containing a collection of data, but they're a more flexible way of doing it. Now, you'll notice a couple of differences between lists and dictionaries. Lists started with a square bracket. This starts with this curly bracket and ends with a curly bracket. Okay? You'll also know that the information inside the dictionary is different. First of all, you have the key, then you have a colon, and then you have the value. And this constitutes a single key value pair. So when I want to know what the value of name is in my person dictionary, I can say person of name, and it will give me the value Lisa. Or I can say person of age, and it will give me the value 29. And you'll notice that Lisa is a string and 29 is a number. So you can mix and match the data types of your values. So that's what a dictionary is. It's actually relatively simple, and you can combine a dictionary with lists and do all kinds of interesting things. Now, this just tells you how a dictionary and a list are different. And basically, it's name-value pair as opposed to having a set index. And also, it makes it more meaningful. A dictionary is just a more meaningful way. You don't know that 29 here is, the, price that I paid for dinner. But when I have it in a dictionary, I know that it means age. So a dictionary can be a more meaningful tool. When would you use a dictionary? Well, you use a dictionary, Okay. Basically what I just said. When you want to, when you don't necessarily want something to start at 0 and end at a number, or when you want to give it meaning. So how did I create a dictionary? Well, very much like I created a list with an open and close bracket, I create a dictionary with an open and close curly bracket. Very simple. Syntax is very similar. It's just curly brackets as opposed to square bracket. So, hold on. Run the code to the left. So, click on the Create Empty.py tab on the left, create an empty dictionary, and the file on the left, create, and assign it to the variable empty dict. Print the contents of the dictionary to the console. I don't know what that wants you to do, so we're just going to keep going since it's not a challenge. All right, so creating a populated dictionary. Very simple, okay? So creating a populated dictionary is what we had just done previously. So I'm just going to copy this over. That's how you create a populated dictionary, okay? You open curly bracket, close curly bracket at the end. You assign it to a variable, and you have name-value pairs. And that's what you do. This is just the syntax of it. And here are just some keywords. Okay, how do you get data out of a dictionary? Well, you do that by using the keys. So we have a key that's name and a key that's age. So like I did before, I said print person, open square bracket, name, and it's going to give me the name Lisa. I'm going to print person age, and now I get the age. So that's how you get data out of the dictionary. And this is going to be wrong because I'm printing both. Because I printed Lisa and age. So I could have just done this to get this one right. Okay. So adding entries into a dictionary. Well, it's very simple to do that. It's very much like when you added something to a list, except in this case, you use the key as opposed to an index. So I have this person, okay? I'm just going to copy this over here. And I want to add to person, I want to add the school that the person went to. So I can I'm just copying these over here for quickness. And if I print person, what I will see is that the first time I had person, it was age 29, name, and Lisa. And now I have age 29, school, SNHU, name, and Lisa. So this is right here, how you add a new key value pair to the dictionary. Okay, so how do I change entries in the dictionary? Well, let's say that I'm going to go back here and copy this. Because it's quicker. So let's say I turned 30 this year. Well, first of all, let me just make it. So let's say I turned 30 this year, and I want to change that age. Well, how do I do that programmatically? Well, it's very simple. So print person, just so we can see what's in there. Okay. Oh, sorry, we actually hadn't done it. So, and then what I want to do is I want to say person of age equals 30. So that's what I did. And that's all you have to do to change the value of a dictionary element. Okay. Delete elements from a dictionary. That's actually very simple. All you use is the del keyword. So del person of name will take the name element out of the person dictionary, and you will be left with this. If I want to get rid of all the elements in a dictionary, I use the clear function. So just like with lists, when you got dot append, because it's a list, well, because this is a dictionary, you get things like dot clear. You get a function called clear. Excuse me. And it will, in fact, clear the dictionary, clear everything out of it. Oh, sorry about that. And if you want to delete a whole dictionary, you can use the del keyword. Okay, so here's what's important for the milestone. Lists of dictionaries. Okay, one of the things you can have in a dictionary, in a list, is a dictionary. So if you want to have a collection of dictionaries, all with name-value pairs, you can do that. So in this case, we have all of these dictionary elements, name, and then we have Lisa, Jay, and Doug, and they're all different ages, 29, 25, and 27, but they all go to the same school, SNHU. So that's just what they are. Now, how do I get to that information? I get to that information by saying person of, in this case, the row number, because these are all rows. Okay, that's a row. That's a row. That's a row. Okay? So person in row, the second row, so this is row 0, this is row 1, this is row 2. So the person in row 1, what is their name? Well, their name is Jay. And I could have done the person in row 2, what's their age? Okay, so I could run the code and it will say Jay is person in row 1 and that's his name. Well, in row 2, what's the age? Well, the age in row 2 is 27, 0, 1, 2, 27. Now, if I do something wrong and I give it a range, if I go past 2, because this is 0, 1, and 2, and I run it, I get my index out of range. Also, if the key's not there, what's going to happen? Well, we again get a trace back. In this case, it says key error XXX. So that's a new error for us, but my XXX didn't exist, just like name with a capital N doesn't exist. Okay? So this is a key, and this is a key, and this is a key. And only those keys that we have here on the left side of the colon will work. So that will work. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. You can also have a dictionary of dictionaries. And I'm just going to kind of go through this a little because I don't think we need a dictionary of dictionary in the milestone. But basically, a dictionary of dictionaries is just an open and close outside curly brackets. And then inside, you have, Didn't mean to do that. You have a key, and the value is a dictionary. And you have a key, and the value is a dictionary. So instead of having to go row-wise, you can simply use two key values. So the name of the person in 1998 is Doug. So if we run the code to the left, the name of the person in 1998 is Doug. We could also say the age of the person in 1987 is 29. So that's pretty much all it is. It's not, and you can expand on this. You can do dictionaries and dictionaries and dictionaries if you want. You can take things to the absurd. Now, there are no challenges for the dictionary one. So let's go back into the dashboard and do some reviewing on the current milestone, the milestone that we're going to have to do. And I'm going to do my best to get this wrapped up soon. Okay. So this is a grocery list. So that tells you that we're going to be having lists and probably dictionaries. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to gather user input, we're going to loop through a grocery list, and we're going to provide output to the console. Three basic things. So this is the draft. It's not the final, so that's fine. So what we have here is we have our data structures. We're going to have the name of a grocery item with the key identifier as name. So this says we're going to have a dictionary. If we have a key identifier like this that is not a number, this is going to be a dictionary. We're going to have the number of grocery items purchased as a number. And we're going to have the cost of the grocery item with the key identifier price. So we're going to have three elements in our dictionary, and it's going to be name, number, and price. And this is an example. Now, it's important here to note that price is a float. So, grocery history. Now, I'm just going to take this right here, and I'm going to copy it into the variable grocery history, because that's what it wants us to do. Whoops. So what we have here, grocery history, is a list, and we know it's a list because of the open and closed square braces, of dictionary elements. So this list of dictionary elements has a name for the item, the number of items that we bought, and the price that we paid for that item. And in this case, there are three. Okay? Now we also need to have an empty dictionary for grocery item. And we do that, whoops, get rid of that question mark. So we created an empty dictionary, and we created a full dictionary. So we have grocery item is empty, and grocery history is full. And we got that from here. Okay. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create a while loop to collect user input. So while we are waiting for something to happen, what's that thing that we're waiting for to happen? That thing that we're waiting for to happen is that the user enters queue. So we're going to stop when the user enters queue. Otherwise, we're going to keep going. Okay? And so while stop is not equal to lowercase q, well, what are we going to do? Well, first of all, I want to make sure I don't have any syntax errors, so I can't run it yet. So the first thing I want to do is accept input of the name of the grocery item purchased, and I'm going to put it into a variable called item name. So This is where we use that input. So I'm going to have item name equals input. What's my input going to be? Item name. And then I'm going to prompt for the quantity in a variable called quantity. And my input prompt is going to be this. And yes, copying and pasting like this is completely okay for you guys to do. And the final input is cost. And that's going to be an input, price per item. Okay? So I now have 3 inputs, and they look pretty similar to things like name and number and price. So now we're going to create a dictionary entry which contains the name, number, and price entered by the user. So first of all, I'm going to say grocery item. So we already created our empty dictionary up here, right? So I don't have to really create it here. I just have to say grocery item of name equals, and then the item name. And then I'm going to say grocery, and then I'm going to say grocery item of number is going to be int quantity. And then I'm going to say item of, what is it? Price, price is going to be float cost. So I just added some things to my dictionary, and I have item name, item name, number, price, float, cost. That will be the format. So now we're going to add it to our grocery history. Well, how did we append something to a dictionary or a list of dictionaries? Because we have this thing called grocery items. So how do we append to a list? Anybody remember? Anybody remember?
Is it dot append?
Thank you very much. Oops, grocery item. Okay? Now we have to ask the user if they're finished. So I'm going to say stop equals input that. Okay? So now we're going to have a for loop where we're going to go through and check things. We're going to loop through the list and we're going to check stuff out. So this is looping through lists like we did in the first one, and then we're going to print things out. And I'm going to leave it for you guys to loop through the lists and the dictionaries. Okay? I did a lot of work to set up the while loop, the initial while loop, so that you guys can have all that information. So it's your job to go through the grocery history, okay, and do what it says here. So we've already given you that it's a for loop, and so you're going to be saying in And my sorry, are you hearing me now again?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm pretty sure that this is going to be grocery history, and this is going to be a variable name. And then, so because this is a multidimensional list and it contains dictionaries, you're going to be going row-wise through the list, and you're going to be evaluating the dictionary based on the key value pair for that dictionary. So what you want to review when you get to this section is you want to go back to the for loop in the two-dimensional one. You want to look at how to go row-wise through the loop. And then you want to go back into our dictionaries and say, how do I access the name that I want? And how do I access the cost? And how did I then use a helper variable to add up the grand total and print out the grand total? So that's what you guys need to do in the next couple of days, is finish this bottom section. Okay?
Okay.
You think you can do that?
Yep.
Okay. So give it a try. Send me an email if you have any questions. I gave you the top half, so you should be in a good place to start. So let's see what you can do with the bottom half of this. Remember, don't get too frustrated. Don't get too angry. This is only the draft. Okay? It's my job on the draft to see where I can help you get better for the final project. All right? This it only has a few more points than a discussion post. Actually, no, it has the same amount of points as a discussion post. So do the best job you can, but don't get frustrated. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay? So everybody have a good evening, and I'm going to end the conference call now. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.